Good morning. Well, it is good morning. That cafe up there with the staff just going in. Oh, I had a smashing breakfast there yesterday. And over there, that's Dale Sailing. They do online chandlery, but they also do chandlery there as well. And fuel. And we got fuel from them. And we got some chandlery from them. So, quite a decent place. With very knowledgeable and helpful staff. This is the holding berth. If you come in and just grab hold of that and tie yourself on right at the beginning of the marina, don't go sort yourself out. And then that's Dale Sailing's fuel berth. You can pull up there anytime and get your fuel. And then within seconds, you're back out in this mayhem. The Milford Haven, a big river with plenty of industrialisation in it. Well, sailing down it, because the wind's coming the other way, would have to be tacking. And although there's a boat ahead of me doing exactly that, that's not what we're going to be doing. That's Milford Haven Marina over there. Spent that much time dodging ships on sail going into the river. I thought I've got to make life easy myself going out. Especially when you look at the cluster of ships just ahead of me. It's tugs turning a big boat round. So they can drive it out. There's the big boat and there's the tugs turning it round, and you got to give them a lot of clearance. There's boats all over the place while they're trying to do it, and they want the ground, and they're entitled to it, I think. But as soon as we get to the end, our sails are up and we're away. And just when you think there's no stopping us now, there is, you know. We were meant to be turning to port as we exited and running along the coast with a little bit of a broad reach, which would have done us fine. But instead, because the firing range is live, we've been shoved out of our way by some 5 miles in the wrong direction as well. And that's actually going to put us more or less on a dead run when we do get back on track, which won't be the most comfiest position in the world. Not for 6 or 7 hours, it won't. I've not got the mainsail up because we're more or less running, and we will be more or less running all day. And then it just seems to shield the foresail, and the foresail gets to flog. And it's not the best driving point in the world when you're running the centre of the boat, so let the Genoa do all the work, I think. There's plenty of wind. Well, we've now turned east of south, which is good news, but we're still heading south-south-east, where we should be heading on a much better heading. We would have been heading originally 90 degrees, but if you have a look at that plotter there, we're nowhere near 90 degrees, and you can see the land's miles away from us. Well, we've got to give the land a 5-mile berth, because that's the shooting range. So we're a lot further out than we want to be. Now, there might be some pros and cons to being further out. You get a bit of a bigger swell. You also get a bit of a bigger lift off the tide when the tide turns. But you've also got to run a lot more miles than you originally had, and I reckon it's virtually 2 hours it puts on the journey, which I don't think I'll ever catch the 2 hours up, which means we probably won't get to the Mumbles where we wanted to get to, but we're going to give it a good shot, especially as it's a nice breezy day. Still not got to our desired course, but we're getting a little bit further round each time we get more around the firing range, but we have got a decent speed over the ground going on. We're averaging about 5.5, 6 knots, and I think that's quite decent. But don't forget, we've got tide, and it doesn't look like we've got much wind. But if you add that to the 6 knots over the ground, there's 16 knots behind us, which isn't too bad to push it along. Being pushed along outside here, though, outside here in the Bristol Channel, it's a bit swelly because it's close. Well, it's not close on springs, really, to tell you the truth. It's probably about 3 days before springs. But the water's still got a stonk on it, and it'll still move quite well. But it'll cause swallow with the wind right behind there to roll a little bit from port to starboard, making it really hard to play checkers. Well, this is where we're starting from here, and this is our destination where we're heading for over here. Well, we started off here going down to Milford Haven, which is absolutely obvious because of where we were. And we're going to come round the corner here, tuck into the land here, keep the wind on our starboard quarter and sail across here, which should have been a good plan, and that should have got us all the way to where we wanted to be here at the Mumbles. But no, that wasn't going to happen, was it? Because somebody was setting explosions off all around here and going to stick on a zone where we couldn't go in around this area. So we were forced to make a southwest and then come round the bottom of this zone before we could get back on course on here. And that put quite a few miles and took a few extra hours off. So I'm looking now that hopefully that we can get to here. And that's our first anchorage that will protect us from a westerly before the evening falls and the tide turns against us, because we don't want to be punching tide. The wind over tide will kick the water up into a bit of a bump that we don't want to be in. So this, as we are at the moment, is pleasant sailing, making good speed over the ground. Because we're running directly now rather than having a bit of air on our quarter, we've got a little bit of a roll on the boat. You can see the boat moves from port to starboard. That's fine, you can deal with it, no problem. When it empties the sail, it becomes a bit of a pain in the backside, because obviously you're losing a bit of power, but we are making a good pace through the water. And to reduce the rolling, you need to come off the wind one way or another. It looks like the spinnaker poles will have to go on the Genoa to try and trap it from emptying all the time. And if that way we can keep it full, the boat mightn't rock from side to side half as much. So that's the pole up, that's the sail up, and has it made any difference? Well, it has made a difference. The rolling has stopped more or less. I mean, we'll get on a pitch of wave which will definitely roll us every now and then. Now see that ship, he's going straight through the fire zone. How does he get away with it and all those little guys have been sent round? That ain't fair. Maybe they'll turn him back with a little bit of luck, but it'll take him the whole of the distance of the firing range to turn round, I'm sure. Well, this is allegedly what I call a one-tide sail, so you can only go for 6 hours sort of in the one direction, and then you've got to decide where you're pulling in. Our 6 hours now is going to run out at that very first anchorage that'll protect us from westerlies, which was spelt E-Y-N-O-N. I'm not going to attempt to say it, so you can just have to say it to yourself. The next bay along, which was twice the size, was called Oxwich. On the charts that had mud for holding and also cables in the mud, so you had to be careful that you didn't lose your anchor to a cable. There were only one in the first, well, one cable in the first one, but it wasn't said to be mud, it was said to be sand and shingle on the chart. But if we're well hidden behind the wind, then sand and shingle should be able to hold us fine. Our tack's changed now that we're coming in, and we seem to have got our line that we would have thought we might have had in the first place, and the boat seems to be flying through the water. Speed over the ground is as low as 4.9, but over 7, so it's somewhere between there. So I'd have said 5.5, 6.5, somewhere around that area constant. The only other thing that seems to be constant are the waves and the roll. And every now and then she gets in this little bit of a death roll where she goes, whoa, 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 and then she takes a couple of seconds to stabilise. And at that particular point there, you've got to grab anything that's sliding quickly or pick her up off the floor. It's your own choice. Wind gets a bit fickle every now and then, but the waves don't get fickle. And we've not got that far to go now, so we're going to be there pretty soon. As you can see, that's the anchorage there. Still got 14 knots of wind or so with the speed over ground, and that cardinal buoy there, all we've got to do is get round that and then we can go into our bay. There's a little bit of overfall just before the cardinal buoy, which isn't too bad at all to go through, but we're sort of towards the edge of tide as well. I should imagine it could be a little bit worse if it wasn't the edge of tide, but that's our bay on the port to turn into as we're making our way around this cardinal buoy. Every now and then we seem to be able to get a little bit of a lift from the wave behind us and almost surf the next one, although the Swallow's never ever surfed anything, because yeah, she does her best to try every now and then. Once into the bay, E-Y-N-O-N bay, it's lovely and flat. We dropped our hook and took some measurements of things around us to see if we're going to drag or not. The hook seems to have gone in quite well, considering it's sand and shingle. But it looks like we're here for a nice sunset, and there's a bit of an outcrop there which should protect us from any swell that comes off those overfalls out there. The next morning it was like a mill pond. It was really lovely. During the night we've had flat calm, a squall, some screaming winds for a bit, some rain, and then woke up this morning with everything bone dry and the sun screaming at us. An adventurous night at the anchor where I sort of had the one eye open because it wasn't in mud. I think we should have breakfast before we go. And when I went to pull the anchor up, you never guess what was on the anchor when it got to the surface. That's right, mud. So if you want the coordinates for the mud section in this anchorage, I'll give them to you. That's my position just there, that little black dot. And there's the coordinates up there, so you can't go wrong. Fishing boat coming back in the morning. Well, as it was, he was heading to the next bay, Oxwich Bay, where there was half a dozen boats all sitting there, enjoying, I don't know whether it was fishing or what, or they just go there for lunch, but there were a group of fishing boats there. Oxwich Bay is quite a big bay, just before the last sort of dune stretches before the Mumbles. I'm making only about 4 knots, but I've got no sail up. I've got about 20 knots of wind in total, and I'm in no rush because I can get there far too early. So I've only put a tiny little bit of handkerchief out just to drag the boat along and keep it steering in a straight line. But as you can see, she's still managing to cover 4 miles an hour with a rag out. Some smashing big hotels on the way as well on the front there with their own little beach. Looks an amazing place that to stay. And a bit further along the coast there's a few more places which look nice as well. Well, here I am, that headland sticking out in the front there. When we get there, it'll be the Mumbles. And at this point, I'm making very little effort in order to get anywhere, but I'm getting there anyway. That's the funny thing that happens with wind. It shoves you along whether you want to go or not. Well, we do want to go, that's why we're out here. And we'll be somewhere fairly soon when we get round the next headland. Smashing hotels, then. Right, well, here we are. This is the Mumbles. This is like the corner that we would have got round and anchored round the other side of should our original plan have come together and we didn't have to be forced apart from our original plan from the firing range. So I don't know what it's like to anchor for the night round by the Mumbles yet, but maybe I'll find out later. The sea's a following sea, but the boat's holding quite steady at the moment. I don't know whether it's because we've only got a rag of sail out and it doesn't spill the wind the same. But it's still the same following sea that we had the other day. Lifts you up, lowers you down, lifts you up, lowers you down. When you start off, you're aware with it. You're aware with the fact that the boat's got that motion. But after about an hour, you become unaware of it and you don't know the boat's got that motion because you've got that motion as well. So it all just works as one. It's a nice morning though. The sun's shining and it's warmer than they told us it was going to be. They said 13 degrees and it feels a lot better than that. The sea state starts changing as you get towards the Mumbles. I think this whole bay, Swansea Bay, has a complete slight on it compared with what's outside. And that's ringing away, ding ding, I don't know if you can hear it. Well, it looked a nice headland to anchor behind on the chart, and it actually looks a nice headland in real life to anchor behind. It looks like you'd have plenty of protection behind that, and now that I know the Swansea Bay has a completely different set of water than the Bristol Channel, if you look at the water here, it's nothing like it was round the corner, so it would have been a nice anchorage entirely. Anyway, we've got to head on in to those brick walls ahead of us. There's a bit of a channel here that you've got to stay in, port and starboard, but it's well buoyed. See how far away you can be, but you can see the walls in front of me now, one either side of the bow, and that gap in the middle is where we've got to head for. The walls are massive when you get to them and you get in. You can't mistake the gap where you've got to actually be, but you don't know which the side is the deep and the shallow, and we're quite low water. We were told to stay on the starboard side, and the starboard side was quite decent. We ended up going round in circles by this, it used to be the old ferry landing area, so we just went round in circles here while we waited for him to open the lock and call us in. But when we were about to go in, there was a little boat coming out, and I stayed on the correct side for the little boat, but it wasn't a very good idea because I ran aground. That running aground sort of stood me for a second, then I backed off the mud and the boat pulled itself off the mud, and to my amazement the log actually started working again, so the mud must have dragged the log around. So that possibly means we'll have a log working when we leave here. When you're actually heading into the loch, you've got to stay over the port side, so you'd have to switch before the orange buoy, which is right in the middle, which I'd have said was a Holden buoy. Once you got past the little buoy, then just stay to the port and you're square to the loch. The loch is actually on the port. When you go into the loch, you can actually grab the port side or the starboard side. There's both ropes in droops and there's cleats, so you can take your choice of what to get hold of. Lisa's got a boat up there to grab a rope, but when she actually goes for it, she grabs a cleat, so I'm not sure. A little bit of confusion, probably me causing it. No sooner we get through the first lock and they're starting to close behind you straight away. The bridge is closing and the lock gates are closing behind you. They don't actually waste any time here. Lisa throws a rope around the cleat and hauls us to a stop, and then we tie ourselves up and just watch the lock actually start filling and us start going up. Once they've closed the big doors behind you and the walkway's up, then they got to concentrate on filling the place, and the water pours through. The other one, they just open it a little bit, and you can see there's a lot of white water in there, so you need to make sure you're well tied to the sides, which we are, sort of, well tied to the sides. 3 places: bow, midships and stern. And this is it, it's travelling up the water at such a pace. Look at the ladder rungs there. I mean, from rung to rung, it's about 13 inches, maybe 12.5 inches. And that's the speed that it travels up at. Just while I've talked to you, just a couple of seconds from showing you the ladder, it's gone up over a foot. So it's climbing quite quickly. But it has got a few feet it's got to climb to get up there. But it's surprising how quickly this place fills up. And then before you know it, the gates are opening up to a whole new world. Well, it's still breezy even in here, and we've got some currents. We go into the Marina and we have to turn directly to port now. We didn't know straight away that we had to turn directly to port because we were supposed to get our instructions when we get here. But when you turn to port and you go down this little channel, there's a little Holden berth there, another pontoon, but it gives you something to get onto before you sort yourself out for going into the Marina. Right in front of us, that's the gate into Swansea Marina, and the little hut you can see just above our coach roof is the Marina control. This is also the fueling pontoon that we're coming up to. So if you're coming just for fuel, same pontoon. We pop into the office, we get ourselves a berth. They open up the gates to their lock to go into Swansea Marina, and you leave the fuel berth behind and tickle into this. But this is where I think that knowing local knowledge is very important, which way the winds are going to travel through these gaps and what have you. So tips are, when you go up to the top, just feel where the wind is. It's that simple. Just make sure that you know exactly where the wind is, so that when you come through these places, you're ready for whatever's going to come your way. Now, there was always a boat ahead of us on the horizon, and it was this one over here. We didn't know it was this one over here, but since we left Milford Haven, this boat's been ahead of us. Continuously seen a mast about 2 miles ahead of us all the way, and it turns out that it's this chap. The whale gets smaller and smaller sometimes. Yes, we did, yeah. Were you the one in front of us? Yeah. Followed you all the way. I'm now fully aware that there's plenty of wind, and I've got to make a tight turn to port, and then a tight turn to port again. I get caught out just a little bit though, because the wind, instead of it staying in this straight line, actually goes round the corner with me and tries to shove me down the leg that I actually want to go on to, but not in the direction that I want to go at it. The wind is sort of in my face as I'm travelling forward at the moment, so I'm thinking as I make the turn there's a dock wall and it will shelter me from the wind, or at least that's what I'm hoping. I'm slowly starting to bring the boat round to port now, as you can see. I've got to come round to port and then there's a dock wall and I've got to go to port again to get into the finger berth. That's the dock wall just there. But trees, as you can see on the top, are taking a good whack from the wind, as is Lisa's hair. And what happens is the boat starts blowing sideways at this point, going towards the fingers. As you can see, the boat's moving sideways instead of a forward motion I wanted. The camera's on the wrong side of the boat for you to actually see the action of what's going on, but I've got to get it back over to that wall somehow, because the gap on my left closing and I can't actually turn the boat quick. So now I've thrown her in reverse to try and pull it round. I've already overshot the end of the finger, so I'll go too far down, and I don't know what's further down there. The wind's behind me pushing on me now, but because I've got it in astern, it's slowing the boat down and stopping it. And I'm using the forward and reverse technique that I've talked about many a times before to try and get the boat back into the wind and bring the bow back to port, where the wind's on the port side of the bow now. And she's coming round nicely, but I'm right by the dock wall now on the back, just probably inches away from it, because I figure the closer I am to the dock wall, the less wind is affecting on the boat. And then I think I've got the right line and I'm going to go in now. And she's actually pulled herself off quite a bit. I even give herself a bit more room than I required, so that I've got, if the wind hits me now, it'll blow me in rather than me scraping along the finger. And as it was, the wind stops about then, and we're able just to come in neatly anyway. So I bring the back end in, and Lisa has to do a bit of a stretchy step to get over, but she wouldn't have had to if she'd have waited a second, because the wind would have brought her in anyway. But there you go. We landed in a very awkward situation there, and this was one of the times I was thinking I was going to miss something that I haven't got anymore, but I've already realised that you don't really need it, as long as you don't panic and you think the situation through. Well, very pleased with myself there that we didn't have to fend off at all. Well, if we did, it wouldn't have been the end of the world, but getting it in one go in a gusty wind in a tight turn is pretty good, and I don't mind saying so myself. Well, this is the Marina, and that's where I am, second to end, that tiny little boat, the blue cover there, and it looks like I had a plenty of gap to get through. So I don't know what I made such a big fuss about after all. Well, would you look over there? There's another one. So including me, that's 3 290s I've seen so far on this little trip, and that must be half of the 290 fleet at least. Okay, from Swansea, till next time, bon voyage.